everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. If you're anything like me, you've spent some time listening to or reading about true crime. You know there exists a chilling reality that we live in a world where serial killers roam freely. They walk among us, disguised as ordinary individuals, their true identities hidden. They live seemingly normal lives, sharing our neighborhoods, our workplaces, and even our homes, weaving their way through the fabric of society until the moment their dark secrets are unraveled. Because it's only when the news breaks, when the gavel of justice falls, that we come to know them as the monsters they truly are. But what about those who encountered these killers and escaped their clutches? They bear witness to the twisted dance between life and death. Their stories are the chilling accounts of close encounters with pure evil, tales of narrowly escaping their own demise. It's both horrifying and fascinating to hear these stories. They remind us that the line between good and evil isn't always a visible one, and the survivors, forever haunted by their encounters, they carry the weight of knowing that they were once in the presence of a killer. They become the reluctant authors of a sinister chapter in the book of human existence. So, let's get started, shall we? While a freshman at the University of Utah, I met and had lunch with Ted Bundy on several occasions, while he was a first-year law student at the same school. Please don't judge the U of U based on either of our attendance there. Now, my getting to know him was just for a few weeks prior to his becoming a suspect in murders of young women in Utah. My impression of him was that he was very interested in women, which would send up no flags. I mean, all of us at that time were obsessed with sex and the opposite sex. But that being said, there were certain things that he would do that bothered me, and in retrospect, they were small clues. He was a handsome law student, so young women were always talking to him. But if they had to leave, like go to class, he would grab them by the arm and hold them there. If one was to do that today, one would be kicked in the testicles by most women I know. He would stare at women in an intense, almost creepy way, but he would never tell anyone what he was thinking. Today, I keep wondering if he was imagining killing them. It horrifies me, even today. I wish I could tell you that I saw one or more signs of his being a sociopath. But back in the late 70s, I don't think I'd even heard the word. And certainly there was not a copy of the DSM-V lying around for me to check off each diagnostic criteria. At best, I thought he was a narcissist. But even that was based on a Psychology 101 understanding of personality disorders. But it was the 70s, and it was really cool to hang out with a guy who had a lot of girls chasing after him. He gave me a ride in his Volkswagen, which he used to prey on women, and which ultimately led to his capture. I keep thinking about that car, and all I remember was that it was neat, and the passenger's front seats seemed loose. I even commented about it. Later, I found out that he would remove the front seat to hide women he had abducted. That really freaked me out years later. When I learned that he was executed in Florida in 1989, I was happy. I'm opposed to capital punishment, but for me, Bundy was an exception. He had no place in the roles of humanity, and the world is a tiny bit better off without him. I was about 10 or 11 years old. My grandmother and I lived in the projects in Racine, Wisconsin, USA. My granny wanted the best for me, so I went to a Catholic school on the other side of town. Before I started to attend, she and my aunt took me to the city bus stop, and we rode the bus to and from the school, just so I was comfortable with the route. I was not a naive child by any means. My grandmother was sickly, and I took care of her. I would ride my bike to the bank with money and a note to get the money orders for bills at that age. I was always taught not to talk to strangers and those types of things, so she was confident I would be okay. I remember like it was yesterday. It was the end of the school day, and it had been pouring rain. The rain was coming down in sheets. The city bus stop was about 2 blocks away from my school. I took a deep breath and started to run as fast as I could, with my backpack over my head. 'Cause, we don't play about our hair. Sometimes there was someone there waiting for the bus as well, but not this day. I stood at the stop in the rain for about 10 minutes. The bus usually came within that time, but not this day. I saw a brown-colored Chevy slowly pass the bus stop and didn't think anything of it. But shortly after, I saw the car coming back down the street. There was a male driving and a female in the passenger seat. The Chevy slowed down in front of me, and the lady rolled the window down. Instantly, I saw a weird look in her eyes, even though she was smiling. She said to me, "Hey, darling, it's pouring down out here. Would you like a ride?" I said, "No, thank you, ma'am." But strangely, they didn't pull off. I remember the man looked in my direction, which made me uneasy. Even at this young age, I was a watcher of people, their mannerisms, and their eyes especially. She asked me again, with a bit more authority, to get in the car because she couldn't bear to see me drenched the way I was. I again said, "No, ma'am." I began to get scared. I didn't know why. I was thinking to myself, why aren't they pulling off? She asked why I was alone at the stop. "Where's your mama?" she said. I said, "I'm not alone. My brother just ran into the house to get his friend before the bus comes." That lie slid right out of my mouth. She started to open her door as if she were going to get out, so I ran and started beating on the random door next to me, instinctively screaming, "James, the bus is coming!" Just then, I saw the bus in the distance. This startled her, and I heard the man say, "Close the door, Deborah." She did, and they pulled off, screeching, the tires and all. I don't know why I was trembling so bad, but I remember being terrified. No one ever did come to that door. I'm an only child, and there was no James. Years later, I was watching a crime show, and I saw a picture of Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown, and immediately I recognized the woman. Although I only saw the man from the side, I was sure it was him. The hair was unforgettable. I broke into a cold sweat all those years later. They had raped and murdered men, women, and children all across Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. They were both subsequently sentenced to death. Alton Coleman was executed. Deborah Brown was ultimately sentenced to life in Ohio, but is still sentenced to death in Indiana, I believe. I'm certain, had I gotten into that car, I wouldn't be here today. I'm grateful I had the intuition that I did, even at that young age. It was a different time then. People were much more trusting. Between you and me, I was a split second from taking that ride, because it was the end of the school day and it was pouring. I had a near brush with the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. I didn't realize that it had happened until a couple of weeks later when the FBI contacted my dad. It was around 1984 or 85. My grandmother had passed away and her house in San Francisco's Marina District was vacant. It was a beautiful house in a spectacular location. Cary Grant used to live there. and it has spectacular views of the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz, and the bay. There was also a creepiness to the house. The address was 3666 Baker Street, so the 3 sixes may have been a coincidence, but I had some family who lived there, and they all died from untimely deaths. I had just graduated from high school in 1984, and my high school girlfriend had come back from college in the Midwest to visit me. She loved the views and food at my grandmother's house, and I told her that my grandmother had recently passed, so the food is not there, but let's go out and watch the sunset, as I had a key. It was the first time entering the house after my grandmother had passed. I didn't realize how quickly the vibrant feeling of a home could change. So there already was a creepy feeling going on as we entered. We went to the top floor and just started to enjoy the view, and then we heard a loud double bang thud sound. I told my girlfriend that there's a tree in the yard that has long branches, and when the wind blows hard on one of those branches, they occasionally bang on the side of the house. She was more observant than me and said that there isn't even a light breeze outside. I looked outside and realized she was right, and it felt like someone had just punched me in the gut, as I knew something was wrong. I wanted to be brave and solve where the sound came from, so I said, "Yeah, you're right. I'll go down and check the basement." As I was about to head down, she stopped me and said, "Do you mind if we just drive to the beach and watch the sunset? I've got a bad feeling about being here." I agreed, as I did have the same strange feeling about the house and the noise too. As 18-year-olds, we walked out of the house and quickly put the incident behind us. A few weeks later, the FBI contacts my father, as he was the executor of the estate. They ask him if anyone had been to the house in the last few weeks, and he said no, as he didn't know that I had been there. They told him that he was lucky because they discovered that Richard Ramirez had been living there for at least a week. And then they gave him the date range. I was there exactly in the middle of the date range. The FBI said that Richard Ramirez was going into the basement through the backyard and that he would kick the back window open while hanging onto a tree branch, the one that would bang against the house. The FBI told my dad that if anyone had been in the house while he was there, he would have most definitely killed them. He had broken into some other homes in the neighborhood, and they found some of the stolen items in the basement, as well as some newspaper clippings and other clues that they couldn't disclose at the time. I told my girlfriend about what had happened, but I waited many years before ever telling my dad. The Night Stalker was arrested shortly after. An angry mob in LA recognized him and chased him down. It's a great ending to a tragic story of serial killing. The house became ours after the estate was concluded, but was eventually sold as none of us wanted to live there. It was around 1977 or 78. I can't remember for sure, but I was a police explorer at the time. Florida was holding a statewide police explorer competition in Tallahassee, Florida. My group was attending this competition. There were about 10 of us, along with a couple of chaperones and police officers from our town. We were staying at a large chain hotel, along with hundreds of other groups from around Florida. I was in the room with 3 other girls. We were all sitting by the sliding glass door, as were most of the other teams around the courtyard surrounding the pool. All of a sudden, a man came out of nowhere. He was completely naked. He jumped in the pool and swam a couple of laps, then got out and started walking back towards our room. All of the girls were screaming and running in every direction, causing our advisors and chaperones to run into the room. The man took off running while still naked, and no less than 10 or 15 cops in hot pursuit. They chased him across a busy highway, and unfortunately for him, he took a wrong turn and was apprehended in a handball court. The cops brought him back to the courtyard for us girls to identify. The cops told us to look for his clothes, which we did, and we found a navy suit with nice leather shoes neatly folded in some of the landscaping around the pool area near our room. One of the local cops who was doing the arrest said that it was a shame this man did what he did because he was apparently Irish, and so was the cop. The man's name, or the name he gave the cops, was Mundy. I remember standing very close to the man. He was tall, very handsome, wavy brown hair and piercing blue eyes. I just remember thinking how incredibly handsome this man was, and why would such a nice-looking man do something so bizarre? He was very charming, had a beautiful smile. He kept smiling at me and the other girls. We were 15, 16, and 17 years old. Turns out this man gave a false name. His real name was Ted Bundy. Soon after returning home, within a few days or a couple of weeks, we saw on the news about Ted Bundy. We realized the man around the pool was not who he said he was that night, that he'd given a false name. It was definitely 100% Ted Bundy, not Mundy. We kept expecting a phone call from the local police or someone, but we didn't. So, I'm not sure if the local cops ever put two and two together. The man was probably released after a quick appearance before a magistrate. I later learned Ted Bundy was in Tallahassee at that particular time after escaping prison in another state. He went on to kill women in the Florida area and was apprehended soon afterwards. George was one of these 20-somethings who preferred the company of high schoolers. He was somewhat of a beloved figure. A charming black man in an extremely white town. A bit of a troublemaker, sure, but more of a rascal than anything else. He volunteered with the city's police department, but he would also volunteer to buy beers for his underage friends, especially the girls. Girls loved George. He had a lot of female friends. I wasn't one of them. Mostly due to the fact that I was more or less a straight arrow in high school. Plus, unlike most of my friends, I wasn't scared to venture into the semi-shady neighborhoods across the bridge. There, I could buy alcohol directly from the source, the sketchy convenience stores that sold it to minors, bypassing George and his ilk. Though I wasn't much of a partier, I did like to hang out with Peter, another party boy in his early 20s. Peter lived in a house that he owned, but the backstory was rather tragic. His family had been killed in a car accident, and he'd purchased it with the settlement money. Peter was the only survivor, and the accident left him with quite a few facial scars, certainly emotional scars, and I now realize a bit of brain damage. Peter filled his house with furniture cast-offs and things stolen from the high school, and teenage roommates who somehow had the wherewithal and parental permission to live with the guy. It was the quintessential party house. Any given night, there was some type of underage gathering over there. Peter, like George, loved the ladies, but he was more into the 13, 14-year-olds. At 17, I was too old for him. Yeah, I know, but it was the 80s and things were tolerated. The big parties would happen on the weekends, attracting hundreds of kids sometimes. Without Peter's knowledge, George started coming around. These gatherings could get big. I spoke to George a few times, definitely accepted a free beer from him on several occasions, but he didn't appear to like me very much, which wasn't surprising. I was a dorky wallflower type, and the guys who did like me, they tended to be on the dorky side as well. But Peter liked me and my friends, and I liked him, even though he was prone to fits of rage. He was smart, a funny guy, and we had a nice platonic friendship. I was welcome in his house and felt comfortable stopping by just to see what was going on. When I got my license and started driving and working part-time, I started coming around more and more. Peter's house wasn't far from my workplace, and I'd often stop by after work. Those gatherings were smaller, usually just a few people huddled around an electric heater, smoking weed or clove cigarettes. It was during one of these weekday hangout things when George arrived, with a case of beer and an entourage of young women. Rocker chicks, slightly older. Definitely didn't look like they lived on the island being a snooty bastion of preppies, with a few goths and waivers mixed in. Peter didn't usually mind strange girls showing up at his door, but George was another story. Peter immediately confronts George, tells him to get the fuck out. George puts on the charm. Hey, what's the problem? I've got plenty of beer for all of us. Come on, let's party. The group gathered inside is saying, Hey, calm down, Peter, let him in. All the time, I thought that either Peter didn't want the competition for his attention, or he was just being racist. But Peter held his ground, told him to go away, and to never come back, that George was unwelcome on his property, and if he returned, he'd be shot on sight. Peter was fond of guns and owned several. Many years later, long after George's crimes came to light, the book had been published and the TV true crime special had aired. Peter claimed that he knew George was a sociopath all along. I didn't want him to have anything to do with me or my friends, he claimed on a Facebook thread about the guy. So, yeah, I partied with a serial killer, but luckily, I never got too close. I went to high school with George Russell, a serial killer, who was tried and convicted of multiple sadistic necrophile murders 6 years after we graduated. This isn't my story. It's my step-grandmother's. I sat watching the news with her when an old picture of a serial killer came on the screen. Did you know I lived over the road from him? She said to me. No, I exclaimed, and she nodded and told me about it. He was very charismatic, charming, and lovely to all the kids on the street. He always offered us sweets and was happy to talk to us. His wife wasn't as fussed, but she still spoke to us on the rare occasion she came outside. We all played outside on the street, as was the norm back then, going up and down, playing hopscotch and the like. Everybody's parents left them to it and didn't know where we were half the time. The world felt safer. Then one day, my own grandmother told me that we couldn't play outside. She kept us indoors, away from the windows. The police were searching the neighbor's house. It wasn't until many months later we found out what had happened and how many children he and his girlfriend had killed. They took a girl from one of the local roads, I believe, though she was older. We weren't allowed out without somebody watching after that. I think it stuck in people's minds that Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, they could have done the same to any of their children too. When she finished her story, my blood ran cold, and I still get chills every time I tell it. I'd just started dating a girl from Leeds, a good few miles away from me. I was pretty engrossed with this girl. She was my first, so subsequently I missed the last bus home and had to walk. Her family were dead against me spending the night, so off I set. It was around 11 p.m., and I lived about 7 miles away, so I had at least an hour's walk home. I started thumbing a lift. There wasn't much traffic, but I lived in hope. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I heard a car in the distance behind me. I stuck out my thumb and prayed. The car stopped and the front passenger door popped open. I should explain I had fairly long black hair then. I wore it in a ponytail. So I climbed into the car and the driver just stares at me for a good 10 seconds. His first sentence was, "I thought you were a girl," which wasn't quite as weird as it sounds, but he did seem a little bit peeved that a spotty teenage lad had gotten into his car instead of a girl. He asked where I was off to, so I told him it was the next village. It was on his way, and it wasn't a problem. Quick 10-minute car journey. Anyway, he started chatting about mundane stuff, football mainly. Then he asked if I had a girlfriend, and if I fucked her tonight. With that, he tried to grab my hand, laughing and asking to sniff my fingers. I was really freaked out by this. I was quite a naive young lad back then. He then proceeded to tell me about his last girlfriend and how he'd ripped her because she wouldn't give him sex. I tell you, all I wanted to do was get the fuck out of that car. My village was fast approaching, and at my road end, I asked him to stop and drop me off, which, thankfully, is what he did. As I got out, he said, "You're a lucky lad. There's a lot of nasty bastards out here who'd have robbed you and took you for a ride." I mumbled my thanks and legged it home like the devil was chasing me. I was so bloody scared. 3 weeks later, on the national news, I saw the bloke who gave me a lift. He was charged with the rape and murder of several young women around my area. His name was Peter Sutcliffe. He's still in prison, and he was the reason I stopped hitchhiking. Full disclosure, I did not have face-to-face contact with him, and I would never want to take away from nor imply my experience to be more horrific than the experiences of those who actually did that night. I was a senior in high school in January 1978 and planned to attend FSU in the fall. That mid-January weekend in 1978, my roommate-to-be, Roxy, and I took a road trip to Tallahassee to experience the co-ed life. We couldn't wait to graduate and live on our own in a college town. We arrived Friday evening and met up with another friend from our hometown who was a freshman at Florida State and our hostess for the weekend. Her dorm was Gilchrist Hall, which is situated right across from the Chi Omega House, basically the center of campus at the time. The city and campus was beautiful and so cool to us yahoos from a small, sleepy town with no nightlife. Having grown up on the east coast of Florida, which is flat and full of palm trees, Tallahassee had old buildings and crawling ivy, rolling hills, and older, cooler college students doing college-type activities. We were mesmerized. That Saturday evening, we went to Sherrod's, a popular college bar across the street, next door to the Chi Omega House. I was only 17, but the drinking age in Florida that year was 18, and bars were lax in terms of alcohol service to minors. And it was a college town. It was later reported that Ted Bundy was at the bar several hours before committing the Chi Omega murders. After spending some time at the popular hangout Sherrod's, Roxy, Karen, and I were then off to a frat party at the Lambda Chi house. I don't remember much about the night other than walking around with my solo cup of grain alcohol punch and talking to people. Eventually, we were all partied out, met up, and jumped in my little Toyota Corolla to drive back to the Gilchrist Hall. As we headed toward the dorm, I slowed down due to police cars and flashing lights. As we approached the Chi Omega house on the right, there was a couple standing outside on the lawn in an embrace, one that indicated something terrible had happened, and they were comforting each other. A bad car accident? It was late, sometime after 3 a.m. We made our way back to the dorm and our beds, crashing. Out of a deep, alcohol-infused sleep on Sunday, mid-morning, came loud pounding on the door. Gestapo-like pounding that continued at each door all the way up and down the hall. The resident assistant called for all of the residents to come out now for an emergency meeting. I remember the Gilchrist Hall residents, me and Roxy, sitting along the wall in that dorm hall. There came the sobering news. 2 Chi Omega sorority sisters had been killed, a stone's throw away from us, only hours before. Do not go out alone. Do not prop doors open. Be careful. Our magical weekend ended in that sobering moment. Roxy and I left a short time later. We had a 5-hour drive to discuss our crazy weekend. And it wasn't lost on us that it could have been us. We could have been Bundy's victims. He could have been at Lambda Chi and charmed one of us off somewhere. I'm sure I thought that was a scenario I could handle at the time, And when you factor in alcohol, or he could have walked into the side door of Gilchrist Hall and attacked someone, or the possibilities, they were endless. But I was happy to be in my car with my friend. That fall, as freshmen at FSU, Roxy and I went through Rush Week. I recall visiting the Chi Omega house. There was an elephant in the room. No one wanted to pledge that sorority. The FSU campus changed forever. Bushes were cut back. Doors were never propped. You didn't open the door to strangers. Ted Bundy may have moved on, but his presence, even if yet unknown, was still living there. People talked about where they were and what they were doing when the murders occurred. It was too close for comfort. May all of Bundy's victims rest in sweet peace. I hope and pray that their loved ones have found some comfort and healing. There, but for the grace of God, go I. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough for those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of my patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.